All right, our theme for this series is from Proverbs 31, verse 30. Charm is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a woman who fears the Lord, she shall be praised. In this series, we're studying godly women of the Bible and how they exemplify the Beatitudes taught by Jesus in Matthew chapter 5. Today, we're going to be tying in with Matthew chapter 5, verse 5. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. And we're going to be looking at Deborah, one of the judges. Deborah, whose meekness enabled her to put God first and be an effective servant leader in Israel. All right, little history, just because that's my favorite thing is the history. God called Moses to lead Israel out of slavery in Egypt. Joshua succeeded Moses as leader of Israel and led the people into Canaan. In Judges chapter 2, verse 7, we read that the people served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who survived Joshua, who had seen all the great work of the Lord, which he had done for Israel. But then Joshua dies. Okay, what happens after Joshua dies? Let's go ahead and read Judges 2, verse 13 to 15 and verse 18 to 19, please.
For they forsook the Lord and served Baal and the Ashtoreths. And the anger of the Lord was hot against Israel, so he delivered them into the hands of plunderers who despoiled them, and he sold them into the hands of their enemies all around, so that they could no longer stand before their enemies. Wherever they went out, the hand of the Lord was against them for calamity, as the Lord had said, and as the Lord had sworn to them, and they were greatly distressed. Verse 18, and when the Lord raised up judges for them, the Lord was with the judge and delivered them out of the hand of their enemies all the days of the judge. For the Lord was moved to pity by their groaning because of those who oppressed them and harassed them. It came to pass when the judge was dead that they reverted and behaved more corruptly than their fathers by following other gods to serve them and bow down to them. They did not cease from their own doings, nor from their stubborn ways.
Thank you. All right, so Moses had warned the people, as long as you follow God, God will give you all these blessings. If you turn away from God, here's the punishment. He was very specific and very graphic in describing those punishments. But Israel starts this cycle. They follow God for a while, and then they stop. They turn aside to other gods. They turn their backs on God, and this repeats. And then God allows their enemies to oppress them, to win battles against them. And then after some number of years, sometimes 7 years, there's one time 20, there's one time it was 40 years. But eventually they cry out to God again, and God sends a deliverer in the form of a judge. And this judge would lead them in battle against their enemies. And the cycle repeats 12 times in the book of Judges. You think they would, although I don't learn things very fast either, but you would think that eventually they would say, hey, there's a pattern here. We do this, something bad happens. But the cycle repeats 12 times over the next about 350 to 400 years in the history of Israel, as recorded in the book of Judges. We see in Judges chapter 3, the first 3 judges of Israel. Verse 9, we have Othniel, who went to war against Mesopotamia and freed Israel. Verse 27, we have Ehud, who killed the king of Moab and led Israel in war against Moab. Verse 31, we have Shamgar, who killed 600 Philistines and saved Israel. The judges kind of acted as kings. They were the leaders. They were the military leaders. They led Israel in war against their enemies. They restored spiritual faithfulness, and they administered justice. But then, the cycle repeats itself again in Judges chapter 4. Let's go ahead and read verses 1 to 9 and then 14 to 16. Okay.
When Ehud was dead, the children of Israel again did evil in the sight of the Lord. So the Lord sold them into the hand of Jabin, king of Canaan, who reigned in Hazor. Commander of his army was Sisera, who dwelt in Harosheth. I think that's right. And the children of Israel cried out to the Lord, for Jabin had 900 chariots of iron, and for 20 years he had harshly oppressed the children of Israel. Now Deborah, a prophetess, the wife of was judging Israel at that time.
She used to sit under the palm of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim. And the people of Israel came up to her for judgment. She sent them and summoned Barak, the son of Abinadab, from Kedesh and Nephthah, and said to him, "The Lord, the God of Israel, commands you, go gather your men at Mount Tabor, taking 10,000 from the tribe of Naphtali and the tribe of Zebulun, and I will draw out Sisera, the general of Jabin's army, to meet you by the river of Kishon with his chariots and his troops, and I will give him into your hand." Barak said to her, "If you go with me and I go, I will go. But if you will not go with me, I will not go." And she said, "I will surely go with you. Nevertheless, the road on which you are going will not lead to your glory, for the Lord will sell Sisera into the hand of a woman." Then Deborah arose and went with Barak to Kadesh.
And Deborah said to Barak, "Arise, for this is the day in which the Lord has given Sisera into your hands. Behold, the Lord has gone out before you." So Barak went down from Mount Tabor, and 10,000 men followed him. And the Lord routed Sisera with all his chariots and all his army with the edge of the sword before Barak. And Sisera alighted from his chariot and fled away on foot. But Barak pursued the chariots and the army as far as Harosheth something or other, Hagoyim, and the army of Sisera fell by the edge of the sword. Not even one was left. All right, so the setup here is Israel has turned away from God again. It's the fourth time. I mean, they just keep repeating this pattern. And so we're introduced to, so they're punished. God allows Jabin, the king of Canaan, to overcome them. And verse 3, they cried out to the Lord, for he had 900 chariots, and he oppressed the sons of Israel severely for 20 years. I mean, I don't know what all went on, but they would do things like, and I think in Gideon's case later on, as soon as the crops were ready for harvest, they would come in and they would take all the food. They would take all the crops. So when they were saying they were severely oppressed, they were being killed, they were being starved. I mean, all these things were happening. And 20 years later, they're crying out to God. Pretty stubborn when it takes 20 years. But anyway, so Deborah is a prophetess and she is a judge. And she sends word to Barak, and he says, God says, gather these men. I'm going to give the army into your hand. So they go into battle, and Sisera he's a commander of the enemy army. He's losing. He jumps off his chariot and he runs for it. Okay, I mean his guys are still fighting probably, but anyway. So he runs to the tent of a woman named Jael. She's the wife of Heber, and he went there because there was a peace treaty between Heber and King Hazor, the king of the Canaanites. So he thought, I'll be safe here. That's in verse 17. In verse 18 to 20, he asks her for food, for something to drink. I mean, he's exhausted, and then he lays down to sleep. He says, don't tell anyone I'm here. Fine. She says, lay underneath this. Well, in verse 21, he's exhausted and falls asleep, and Jael takes a hammer and a tent peg and kills him with it. Sisera, commander of the enemy army, he goes to someplace that he thinks he's going to be safe, to someone that he thinks is an ally, and he lays down, he falls asleep. She kills him with a hammer and a tent peg. She hits this thing through his temple and into the ground. I mean, that's wow. Quite yeah. So, when we read about women in the Bible, they are not weak. I mean, when you can pound a hammer like that.
She knew
anyway. Yeah.
But
again,
some little framing hammer.
No.
Oh,
No.
she
So in verse 22, so again, Sisera, the army that Sisera led, the Israelite army that Barak led, Israel wins. The army that Barak leads, verse I think 17 says that, 16 says that not even one person was left. So Sisera has run for his life because all his army is dead. Barak's chasing him because again, he's the commander of the army. And in verse 22 says that Barak was pursuing Sisera and, arrives at the tent of Jael, and she says, come on inside. I'll show you his body. And so verse 23 says, so God subdued Jabin, the king of Canaan, on that day before the sons of Israel. Okay, so everybody's got the story? Cool. All right. So on about Deborah. Well, in verse 1 of chapter 4, we see again this pattern of Israel turning away from God, being punished by God, crying out to God, God sending a judge to rescue them. We see this pattern repeat itself for the fourth time. But then in verse 4, God chose a woman this time to be judge and prophet in Israel. So let's define some terms first before we get any further. What was the role of a prophet in the Old Testament?
That was how God spoke to the people.
That's how God spoke to the people. Okay. Two things that were specific about a prophet in the Old Testament. They were called by God and they delivered God's message. Okay. God chose his prophets. So you were called by God. You didn't wake up one morning and decide, I'm going to be a prophet. I'm going to write this book, and I'm not going to go there. In Deuteronomy 18, starting in verse 15, Moses told the people that after him, God would continue to call prophets to deliver messages to Israel. Moses didn't have the last word from God. God continued to speak to Israel through the prophets. And in verse 19, Moses told them that they must listen to any prophet from God, but don't listen to false prophets. Well, of course, the obvious question is, how do we know the false ones from the true ones? And he says, well, there's a test, whether or not someone was a true prophet. And so turning back to Deuteronomy 18, let's go ahead and read verses 21 and 22, please.
You may say in your heart.
Already got behind first.
You let me know when you get there.
Deuteronomy who?
18.
18 what?
Verse 21 and 22. You want to read it?
No, I just wanted to get there.
Are you there?
I'm there.
May I read?
Yes, ma'am, please.
You may say in your heart, how will we know the word of which the Lord has not spoken? When a prophet speaks in the name of the Lord, if the thing does not come about or come true, that is the thing which the Lord has not spoken. The prophet has spoken it presumptuously. You shall not be afraid of him.
Okay. So Deborah, and back in Judges chapter 4, Deborah is known as a prophet. She has been called by God. And at some point, because of course we don't have everything written down that ever happened, which that would be very cool because it would be lots more history. I know we couldn't carry it around. It probably wouldn't even fit on my phone. But again, at some point she talked about something that was going to happen and it happened. She has proved that she is a prophet from God so that the words that God is speaking through her, they can know that she is actually speaking words of God. Yes.
Do we know anything about Lebanon,
About who?
her husband?
Nope. Don't know a thing, except that she was married.
Just that old boy, okay.
Well, except that she did have a husband, and that's what we know.
Okay.
All right. So first, a prophet was called by God, and second, a prophet delivered God's messages. Prophets in the Bible had teaching and revelatory roles. That is, they declared God's truth and they revealed details about the future. Of course, it's very different between, there's a big difference between how God communicated with his people in the Old Testament and how he communicates with Christians now. I believe we have Hebrews. Wait till you get to Hebrews. Hebrews chapter 1 and verse 1 and 2, please. And we'll wait for Christy.
I'm there.
I don't even know who has it. Did I not hand out all these?
I have the Hebrews, but it's not.
All right. I'll go ahead and read it. Hebrews 1, starting in verse 1. God, after he spoke long ago to the fathers and in the prophets in many portions and in many ways, in these last days has spoken to us in his Son, whom he appointed heir of all things, through whom also he made the world. All right. They waited around and they had prophets in the past and they would come along with words from God. Well, now we have gotten the final word from God that we need through Jesus. We don't need anything else. It's completed. The mystery has been solved, as Paul said, and we have all that we need to know from God. Wish I had a whole bunch more sometimes, though, don't you? It's kind of like, couldn't you just fill in this part for me? But we don't. We'll find out sooner or later. All right. I'm sorry?
What was the rule?
The role of the prophet was to deliver God's message. All right. So we also see in Judges chapter 4, verses 4 and 5, that Deborah was also a judge. So what was the role of a judge during the time of the book of Judges? There were 12 of them. What was their role?
But one of them was to rule the armies. But
Yeah.
the second one was to make decisions about things that are going to happen.
Yes. They were military and spiritual leaders. They were chosen by God. They did, you didn't just stand up and say, "Hey, I'm going to be a judge." That would not work. They were military and spiritual leaders chosen by God to deliver Israel from oppressors, restore spiritual faithfulness, and administer justice. Just what Chrissy said, just more wordy. So, all right. Now, Deborah did not lead by exerting the same kind of authority as the other judges. That is, she didn't lead men into battle. She didn't go, yes.
Was she the only female judge?
Yes, she was.
That's probably why. Because she was a female, so she wasn't able to lead people.
Well, no, she was still a leader, but she led differently. She did not jump out in front. I mean, judges at this time, they were the ones that were going to, she was not Joan of Arc. Judges at this time were the ones who were going to be the generals and lead the men into battle. And she did not, that was not her place. That was not what she was going to try to do. So she did not lead by exerting the same authority as other judges, but as judge, she applied the law of Moses to settle disputes in Israel. And she exhorted Barak to fight as God had commanded. So she still had her role. It wasn't the same as the other judges. So again, that brings me to what's the difference between humility and meekness according to the Bible. So what's humility?
Lowliness of mind.
Lowliness of mind. I like that one.
Being
Sorry.
humble.
Gentle.
Being humble.
Yeah, humility is being humble. All right. The definition I saw that I liked was an internal lack of pride. So humility is kind of an internal thing. A modest view of one's own importance. The definition I like best is from C.S. Lewis, not thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less often.
Humble in spirit.
Mm-hmm.
Did you get the, what was humility?
Yes, that it's thinking of oneself less often.
I went in and it said that the true humility is exemplified by Jesus Christ, who served others and submitted to God's will, ultimately giving his life for humanity. And she wrote the song of Deborah and Barak. I
Right.
put that on there anyway.
Cool. Yes. And then what do we think of when we think of meekness?
Somewhat timid, I guess, but a true meekness was quiet and patient in nature, depending and believing in God, with strong faith, and then in that she helped to subdue Jabin.
Now again,
David.
meekness as far as Webster's, and I'll get to that later, is different than the meekness that we see in the Bible.
So
Right.
how would you?
Well, meekness in the Bible is more of an outward manifestation of one's humility. It's restraint.
Power and strength under control.
Power, I like that one. Power and strength under control.
Jesus showed meekness at all times.
Yes, he did. I've heard it described before as war horse. Then none of us have ever seen a war horse, but have you ever seen a video of a police dog? That thing is that dog is controlled by their handler, and their handler decides when the dog is going to do what. That all that power to take someone apart, which is actually really cool, but when it's the bad guy. But again, all that power is under the control of someone else. So
And
again,
the strength of a horse, when they blow that horn at the racetrack, I mean,
Right.
they're running, they're ready to go, and that's what they do in war.
Yep.
They're ready to go, they're strong.
And that war horse will go through explosions and gunfire and,
but again,
they
so
need
will
more
that,
than
so
one.
so will any dog that's trained for that. They will
That's
just
true.
ignore all those things. But again, that whole idea of having power, but having it under control. And usually someone else's control, as in with Deborah here, under God's control.
Some words that I found were gentle, mild, of a soothing disposition, unadornment of the Christian, and adornment of the Christian profession,
Okay.
like Christ.
Now, I don't quite see Deborah as being quiet and, or anything like that. But again, anything that she did it under God's authority. And she also submitted, it mentions that she had a husband. Clearly, she would have submitted to her husband's authority. She told Barak, it's kind of like, you are the one that is in charge of the army. You are the one to lead the army. Now, he's the one that turned around and said, I won't go if you won't go. But again, she was telling him, God has given you the victory. All right. So Matthew 5 verse 5, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Deborah's meekness enabled her to put God first and be an effective servant leader in Israel. And I want to look at 3 ways that Deborah demonstrated meekness. First, the way she thinks about herself. In Judges 5 verse 7, she refers to herself as a mother in Israel. And I kind of like that it just, I'm not the mother, I'm not this, I'm not that. She just, a mother in Israel. And again, that's how she thought of herself. Now, she didn't identify herself, say, I'm the judge, I'm the prophet, I'm the leader, I'm super mom. I mean, none of those things.
She didn't say, she said,
she just said a mother in Israel. Not the mother or anything like that. She never placed herself above anyone else. A mother in Israel. I like how she phrases that. And that was her attitude. Even though God called her, God gave her messages. People came to her. I mean, she could very easily, that could have gone to her head. We have read of a queen in Judah who wanted power so bad that she killed her grandkids. But again, so power goes to your head. It's very difficult for that not to happen. But she never placed herself above anyone else. When the people in Israel faced crises, they came to God through her. In Judges 4 verse 5, it says again that she used to sit under the palm tree, and the sons of Israel came up to her for judgment.
I thought that was a neat way of doing it. She sat where she
Yeah.
was not authoritative.
Right.
But, they came to her.
Right. So when there were disputes, personal crises between people, she was able to apply God's word and judge with proper judgment between people. It wasn't her saying, I think, I feel, I want. It was, this is God's judgment in this matter. In verse 8, when she tells Barak to go, because God's going to give the army into your hands, Barak said, if you'll go with me, then I will go. But if you will not go with me, I will not go. Barak felt that need to have Deborah with him when he went to fight against the Canaanite army. And her response was, in verse 9, I will certainly go with you. Okay. And her response in this situation was meekness. Not listen to me, or I have all the answers. And her response wasn't, okay, I'll just take over. Fine. If you're not going to lead the army, fine, step aside. It was nothing like that.
Well, he was still gonna leave the army though.
Yeah, but again, her response
But she
was one of meekness, because again,
He said he was gonna go.
right.
The woman's gonna kill him.
Right. And her response was typified in verse 6, where she says, the Lord the God of Israel has indeed commanded. To where it's not, I think, I feel, I want, it was God has commanded.
It's kind of like Barrett needed her for God to help him.
Mhm.
It's probably how he felt, but he didn't, because you told him, you're supposed to go. You don't need me. You have God on your side. And he was kind of like, no, I don't want you with
Well,
me.
that's the reason how when I read that, it was like, the prophet is with God. I need
Yeah.
her.
I need her
But
to-
again,
to make
forgetting
sure
that it's
God's with
actually
them.
God that is with them. And, you don't need another person with you.
But how
I re-
often do we, if we have a serious thing that we have to do, sometimes we'll say, hey, don't you mind? You say, you wanna come with me so I can deal with this?
Yeah.
Kind of like, give me some support.
Oh, that's definitely
to do,
fine.
And so.
But in Barrett's case,
Yeah.
she had told him very specifically, God is with you in this.
Yeah.
And
And
you
it's-
don't
and this
need
is
anything else.
It's just the judge.
That was Moses. Moses did the same thing.
Yeah.
He thought he needed Aaron. So he,
That's true. And God wasn't very happy with him by
No,
that
he
point.
wasn't. But I'm saying.
It's kind of like, yeah. So,
I told you.
yeah.
I wrote that Deborah was quiet and patient in nature, depending and believing in God, that she had a strong faith in God and helped subdue Jabin. That would have taken a lot, but she was patient, knowing that God would provide.
Yes.
She had a very strong faith.
Oh, absolutely. So the question is, so that's how Deborah thought of herself, was a mother in Israel. I like that phrase. How are we a mother in our families, a mother in our church families? We have the example of Deborah. She didn't insist on her opinions, her feelings, her way, nothing like that. It's just fine. I'm going to help you in any way that I can. She was a mother in Israel. And it was all about what has God said. It was all about the Lord has commanded, not, I want it done this way. But again, we see her meekness in that, because it's always, this is what the Lord has commanded.
It's amazing to me that God appoints this woman to be a prophet. She is a judge over Israel.
Mhm.
And then later, men don't see women as strong because
I know, and then you have Jael who killed this guy with a hammer and a tent peg, and yeah. So let's go ahead and read Colossians 3, verse 16 and 17.
What did it say?
Colossians 2.
16.
Colossians 3.
16 to 17 begins with, let the word of Christ dwell in you richly, teaching and admonishing one another in all wisdom, singing psalms and hymns and spiritual songs with thankfulness in your hearts to God. And whatever you do, in word or deed, do everything in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, giving thanks to God the Father through him.
Thank you. And that's meekness, that whatever we are doing, it's not about me. I am one of many God followers who trying to show God to other people. But it's never about us, just like with Deborah. Any comments about Deborah, a mother in Israel? Okay. The second way that Deborah demonstrated meekness was that she did not take over leadership in a way that was not directed by God. God gave her certain authority, but she never stepped beyond that. When Barak said, if you won't come with me, I won't go, she could have just said, fine, get out of the way. If you're not going to do it the right way, just get out of my way.
Just move.
Yeah,
Can you
just move.
repeat that again? Did
Which
he
part?
take over leadership?
In a way that was not directed by God. He had given her certain leadership and certain responsibilities, but she never stepped outside of those. In meekness, she placed herself in a role to exhort, that is, to encourage others to exercise their responsibilities and their talents. How do we respond in meekness when we see someone doing something and maybe they're struggling, or maybe they're not doing it the way I would do it? Yeah, there's a way I would do it, and maybe oh boy, I could do a better job. When you're stacking those chairs, if you just turn them this way, I mean, we get that way sometimes, or I do sometimes. This was especially hard raising kids for me, and I would see them doing something or cleaning something. Oh, if you would just do it this way. we were talking to our daughter. She actually had a question about parenting. This is our foster daughter. And she was saying, she just doesn't do it this, her daughter, she just doesn't do it this way. I'm kind of, she's 10. She's not going to be able to do it. Oh, I guess not. So again, when it's a kid's, sometimes it was just so hard not to say, if you'll just scooch out of the way, I will, yeah, I will do it because I will do it the right way. And I'll do it. But again, that's not the meekness. That's not the meekness that Deborah emulates here. Yeah. But my role as mother in my home was to encourage my kids to grow in their responsibilities, to grow in their talents. And our role as mothers in church, we're all a mother in our congregation here, in our church family, but our role is to encourage others to grow in their responsibilities and talents. Not take over, not, oh, I would have done that differently. I mean, that's hard sometimes, but they're doing it. And it's kind of like, how can I encourage that? When someone's stepping up and doing something, I want to encourage that.
A way to approach that is asking, have you thought about?
Yes. Yeah.
Not, this is how I would do
Right,
it.
right. Because again, that meekness of,
I tried that so hard with the guys when I was up here, and it's like, oh, don't do it that way, please.
but again, how do we approach in meekness, in a way that encourages, another person? And sometimes there is another way to do it, and it may take twice as long as my way, but it'll get there. That has to be okay sometimes. But again, I want to read 1 Thessalonians 5, verse 11. What you want to do? Okay. Therefore, encourage one another and build one another up, just as you also are doing. Okay. When you just go in and you want to correct that doesn't help really. But encouraging and saying, okay, that was great. And my daughter does this. Sarah does this all the time with her students. It's kind of like, that was great. Let's try this one more time on the piano or whatever. And she's, she says she has this one little boy. He gets really upset if he thinks he did something wrong. But if she says, well, let's just try this, then he's okay. Because again, the encouraging instead of just, you did it wrong. You didn't do it the way I wanted it done. Hebrews 3, verse 13 reads, but encourage one another every day, as long as it is still called today, so that none of you will be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin. If we're not encouraging, there are going to be those who get discouraged. And then the devil will use that opportunity and to discourage, to harden the heart. Discouragement is rough on someone. But we see Deborah in her meekness encouraging Barak. Kind of, okay, let's go. It couldn't have been easy for her to travel with 10,000 guys to a battle. I mean,
Yeah, really.
yeah, it's kind of like camping out that's not my idea of a good time. But she did that to encourage him.
I have patience when it comes to someone who's never done anything, or if it's a child who's learning. But with grown individuals who should
That's all.
better.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Sometimes I need a replacement on my tongue.
Yeah. But again, Deborah could have said, no, I told you God would be with you. She could have just flat out refused. Yeah, I already told you what was going to happen. I already told you God would do, or get out of the way. No, she said, okay, I will go with you.
If they hold your hand.
But
She didn't say
again,
that, did she?
she didn't talk down to him, but it would have been tempting, I imagine. But
Oh,
again,
yes.
she gave him the encouragement that she needed. And third way that we see Deborah's meekness was when she knew that another woman would get the credit. Again, not her getting the credit. Years back, when I first read about Deborah, I thought she was talking about herself when she said that a woman would get the credit. When she tells Barak, it's kind of like, okay, I'll go with you, but a woman's going to get the credit for this victory. I thought she was talking about herself. She wasn't, and she knew she wasn't. She was talking about Jael.
Who we know nothing about.
Exactly right, except that she was a descendant of Moses's father-in-law, so not an Israelite at all. So and they lived in the area of Israel, the Kenites. But she's referring to Jael. Deborah demonstrated that meekness is not about ownership of results. And when I heard, I think Sam said that to me at one point, and I'm kind of like, let me noodle on that one for a minute.
Yeah.
Meekness is not ownership of results. Meekness is about rejoicing in results when God gets the glory. I like doing a good job. I imagine we all do. I like hearing that I've done a good job. But I know that it's God working in me to accomplish his will. And I can rejoice when I see God getting the glory. And that again, that meekness that Deborah demonstrated, that when something that she's working toward and all these other pieces are fitting together and God gets the glory, then that's what she wants. That fulfills her need there. Meekness says that whatever we are able to do with the gifts and abilities that God has given us, we rejoice because God gets the glory, not about me. It was never about Deborah. She was a mother in Israel. Let's go ahead and read Ephesians 3, verse 20 and 21.
Now to him who is able to do far more abundantly beyond all that we ask or think, to him be the glory in the church and in Christ Jesus to all generations forever and ever. Amen.
Thank you. Deborah's focus was on God and his glory, and that was the key to her meekness. That's why we can look at her as an example of meekness, because it was never about her. It was about God's glory. Any other comments about Deborah? Excuse me. So Webster's definition of meek is quiet, gentle, easily imposed on, unable to assert oneself. That is not the Bible's definition of meek. Yeah, that is not even close to the Bible's definition of meekness. We see in the life of Deborah that the Bible defines meekness as strength under control, specifically under God's control. Putting aside ourselves, our own wants, wishes, whatever, to follow and submit to God. Deborah was meek, but never weak. No weak woman could follow 10,000 men into battle. No weak woman could settle disputes between two guys that are yelling at each other and about to knock each other's heads in. Okay, that is not because by the time they had to go and travel to Deborah to settle a dispute, it's gotten hot. Okay, this was not a weak woman. This was a meek woman who always put God first and was always, thus saith the Lord, is the phrase that we used to always use. She put aside herself to follow God. She put aside her needs. I want to stay home where it's nice and cozy. I don't want to follow Barak. I don't want to follow you into war. Are you kidding me? But again, she put aside her needs for someone else's needs for God's glory. Deborah submitted to God. She submitted to men in leadership roles because her focus was to give God all glory. And if that's our focus, then that just, somehow meekness just follows that, when it's kind of like it's all about God and his glory. Deborah was the only woman who was a judge and one of the few women called by God to be a prophet. And very few were called by God to be both judge and prophet. When you read through the Judges, Samuel is the first one that I come across, and he's not even in the book of Judges. Moses arguably was both, but that's again not in the book of Judges. But again, God was able to work his will through Deborah because of her meekness, because it was never about her or what she wanted, or it was all about God's glory. Matthew 5:5, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Deborah remained humble, she remained meek, and God gave Israel victory. Back in Judges chapter 5, verse 31, this is at the end of the song of Deborah and Barak, where they're going over the victory that God has given them. It says in verse 31, the land was undisturbed for 40 years. And when it says, God, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Yeah. But again, the land was undisturbed for 40 years. And like Deborah, we can encourage others as a mother would and rejoice when God gets the glory. I want to finish. Any other comments? As long as she was alive and that the land had peace. And that's a big deal when someone's actually, we don't experience that in the US so much, but when someone's knocking on your door to, you know, to rob you, the army is marching over and burning all your stuff, to have peace. That's a big deal. And so when God says, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth, he gave them peace for 40 years. That was a long time that they did not have to fight battles with all their neighbors. So I want, excuse me, I want to finish with Matthew 5, verse 16. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven.